I'm Dr. Anthony Brown, and it's an honor to welcome you to tonight's RC Chat, a monthly opportunity to provide information and updates regarding the professional counseling services offered by the Renaissance Center. Tonight is special. We're celebrating the center's platinum anniversary, 20 years of reminding the church and community that sometimes all it takes is knowing someone cares. Let's meet our panelists for tonight. These first two faces will be familiar. Bishop Dwayne C. Debnam is the pastor of Morning Star Baptist Church. This year, he celebrates his 25th anniversary. It was Bishop, along with his wife, Dr. Carla Debnam, who founded the Renaissance Center. Lady Carla joins us tonight. With degrees from DeVry University, Loyola University, and the Ashland Theological Seminary, Dr. Carla has committed herself to the mental and emotional well-being of both the church and community. Tonight, we celebrate our founders, Bishop Dwayne C. Debnam and Dr. Carla J. Debnam. Never forget those who stand with you at the beginning of your dream. Two of the center's early pioneers are with us tonight. Minister Vanella Jackson served as administrative clerk, billing clerk, and also as a counselor at the center. Cynthia Hennett, who joins us, was the center's first clinical director. We're looking forward to an exciting evening of dialogue and reflection. Our guest host for this evening is Bishop C. Guy Robinson, a bishop, pastor, educator, author, musician, and mental health theologian with decades of experience in serving the kingdom of God. As an adjunct professor at Morgan State and Hampton University, and with degrees in music, religion, pastoral psychology, and family counseling, Dr. Robinson has conducted extensive research and workshops in mental health, theology formation, biblical counseling, and paradigms for healthy partnerships between pastoral and mental health professionals. Please join me in welcoming our panelists, Bishop Debnam, Dr. Carla Debnam, Minister Vanella Jackson, Cynthia Hennett, and our host for this evening, Bishop C. Guy Robinson, as we look at the 20-year Renaissance Center journey. Bishop Robinson.
Thank you, Dr. Brown, and welcome everyone to this platinum celebration of the Renaissance Counseling Center. And we are so excited to be here, and we celebrate really what the Lord is doing. And Dr. Brown said it right, tonight is special. In fact, I'm reminded of in the movie Coming to America, Prince Hakeem says at one moment to Eddie Murphy, "I am very happy to be here." And so to our bishop, to our host, and to Dr. Debnam, I am very happy to be here and very happy to be celebrating this incredible work that, again, is the Lord's doing. Bishop Debnam, Dr. Debnam, we celebrate all that God is doing, and we want to jump right in, and so grateful for our incredible panel that we have here. So we're going to jump right in, and I want to go back a few years, if I may, actually a couple of decades, and because to me, you guys emulate the critical collaboration between faith and mental health. And you've been doing it literally now for 20 years. And we know that the Renaissance Center 20 years ago had a manifestation, if you will. But before a manifestation, there is inspiration and strategic planning and implementation. And so, Bishop, Dr. Debnam, both of you are Dr. Debnam, so Debnam team, whoever wants to jump in here, would you take us back a little more than 20 years ago to share how the Lord put this, if you will, in your spirit, and when you first knew that you were, if you will, pregnant with purpose as it concerns this Renaissance Center vision?
I'll get us started, and Carla will take the reins in just a few moments. When we think back at least 22 years ago, one of the things that comes to mind is not only the risk, but also the necessity. Sometimes risk and necessity walk side by side. It was a risk opening a counseling center 20 years ago because, especially in the African American community, because it was something that we did not normally do. Normally in our history, in our tradition, persons of African descent, when they had concerns, challenges, problems, they thought the best way to fix it was to drink it out, cuss it out, smoke it out, sex it out. Some even thought they could just go to church and shout it out. And so when we began the journey, we knew that we were taking a major risk, but we also knew it was a necessity, and here's why. As pastor, I recognize that I can't preach everything out of you. I can't even pray out of everything out of you. However, I do know God has given us the tools, the weapons, the ammunition to get whatever's in you out of you if that's his desire. And sometimes and we had to discover and come to grips with way back 20 years ago that sometimes we have persons in place who have the expertise, the strength, the gifts to walk you through a journey to healing. And so when we go back 20, 22 years ago, it was about understanding the necessity of bringing wholeness and healing to our church and our community. Our community has always been filled with much anxiety, challenges and struggles to get through, and we have to find the best way to bring wholeness and healness. Some stuff can be preached out, some stuff can be prayed out. However, some stuff also you have to be guided through. And so Renaissance Center was a vision of bringing wholeness to people. Again, spiritually, we want to make persons whole. Emotionally, we want to make persons whole. Mentally, we want to bring wholeness to persons. And so the Renaissance Center was a good combination of what we were doing spiritually to bring wholeness and fruitfulness into the lives of God's people. I'm going to pause because I could probably talk for the next 20 minutes, and I think Carla's shaking her head now like, that's enough. Let me get in the game. Go. It's in your hands.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we did get the vision from the pastor to begin what was initially called a mental health ministry, and to start looking into what that would look like. And so a call went out to the congregation for persons that were interested in working alongside us to formulate this ministry. So you didn't have to be a clinician, but you just had to be interested in seeing people, healed and made whole. And so from that committee of persons, two of whom are here with us today, we developed the format. We did research to determine how the Renaissance Center would look, what it would be, because there are different options in how to present ourselves to the public, but we wanted to maintain our Christian faith and do that as well. So in order to do that balance between mental health and faith, we made some early decisions in how we would be set up. And so we didn't feel like it was within our best interest to do certain things, because then you wouldn't be able to be expressively Christian. Now, we do take people that are outside of the faith in our services, but just as far as developing it goes, and so that's some of the things that we did. So I'd like to, pass the mic.
Yes, absolutely.
Pass the mic, Minister Vanilla.
Yes. How did it feel to be a part of this vision as it was birthing and coming forward?
Yeah, I was excited. I thought about how much our pastor preached and the issues that he would bring up, and how people would come and say, I've been thinking about that verse that he said, and maybe I should see somebody. Yeah, you should. And when we were talking about it, I said, yeah, this would be the perfect place. The church needs mental health counseling. And so I was excited, and I'm going to cry because I just thought about how much we needed it in the black community. And so I'm glad that we were one of the first.
Yeah.
Praise God. And so, yeah, pass the mic.
I was excited too. And to be able to be part of the vision that Bishop Debnam and Dr. Carla Debnam had was a great opportunity for me. I enjoyed every part as being part of the initial groundwork, foundation, and excited to be part of the process.
This has provoked another question. Same topic, I hope. But Bishop, something you said, you talked about things and the different ways in which God can bring healing and wholeness. He can preach it out through his vessel. We can shout it out through his inspiration. But you said also there are other means in which after the worship service, it needs to be worked out. And that reminded me, there's a scripture in Acts when Paul says to the elders as he's about to go away, he says, I did not shun to proclaim to you the whole counsel of God. And he says, the whole counsel. And he said, I preached before you publicly and from house to house. One represents sort of like the public en masse message, and then the follow-up from house to house and how this becomes applicable to my situation. And so how important is that follow-up, and what are some of the things you had to keep in mind as you are ministering in the sanctuary, and how do you make that transition or to recognize persons that need the follow-up, and how does that work from Morning Star Church proper to the Renaissance Center, not just here, but in any church as a concept?
Yeah, I think that's so crucial and critical. One of the things you know as well as I know, that sometimes as we're preaching, we're teaching, we're doing ministry, certain things rise to the minds of persons. Past pain, past history, even some present drama or situation they're dealing with. And sometimes as we're preaching, teaching, it comes to the forefront of a person's mind. And as they're sitting there in the pews, they start pondering, how in the world am I going to deal with this? And so what preaching sometimes does is it raises a renewed awareness of persons of what they're going through. And at that point, the question becomes, what do we do with it? Because the sermon ends. And after the sermon ends, what comes after that? And so what we often encourage persons to do, listen, as a matter of fact, yesterday I preached a sermon called, Can We Talk About It? And using that text in Hebrews where it says, let's approach the throne of grace so you may receive grace and mercy. Because they are necessary conversations that have to be had. Once things are come to the forefront of your mind and you're not sure what to deal with it, what we do at Morning Star often is encourage persons, find someone who is equipped to talk you through what you're dealing with. Notice I said, find someone who is equipped, skilled, prepared, not just anybody. See, another challenge we have in many churches is so many persons think that they are counselors because they have the gift of gab. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make you a qualified counselor because you like talking.
Yeah.
And so what we do often is encourage persons, and I'll raise it in a sermon after sermon often. Listen, call a Renaissance Center. Why? Because you need to start talking about what you're dealing with. And so what's next after issues are raised is encouraging persons to find somebody who they can talk to again. After the sermon, here's something else. I'm going to throw this on the table. I know I'm taking a lot of time. But here's another thing. As pastors and preachers, for years, we thought, sometimes it was by force, that we had the answers to every issue. Mm-hmm. Early on into my ministry here at Morning Star, I knew I didn't have all the answers. I didn't have the only skill set. I didn't have the specialized skill set in this area. But there were persons around me who did. And so I'm very comfortable with opening Renaissance Center because I knew there were persons more equipped, more gifted, more skilled in this area than myself. And so as I raise issues in a sermon, persons are dealing with them at home, the next step is for me to direct them to find somebody to talk through this issue with, this concern. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that it's like, if you look at the illustration of the Good Samaritan, and I've heard Bishop Jakes illustrate it this way, is that the other two persons just walked by, but the actual Good Samaritan took the time to make sure that the person that was on the side of the road was taken care of, had everything they need, and was healed, or at least had follow-up. So if we look at that illustration, too, that's where we come in as mental health professionals. We're doing the follow-up, the aftercare for persons that are in need. They might have had a spiritual crisis, a personal crisis, or a mental health crisis, but at least it's a place that they can go to do the aftercare. And what is challenging is to get people to really follow up with the aftercare. And once the aftercare begins, to get them to continue in that process, because the process is unfolding. And, the challenge in our culture is that we want a quick fix. They want it to be over. They want one session, or that's why the altar calls are so filled, but the counseling offices aren't. Because the altar call is a quick fix. So if I do a follow-up and say, hey, I got your name after the altar call, I'm calling to make sure you're okay. Oh, I'm good. The altar call did it for me.
Yeah, yeah.
The prayer healed me. I'm healed now from the prayers at the altar, which, we're not discounting that. It's just, okay, let's continue that deliverance process. The deliverance may have begun in the sanctuary at the altar, but it's good to maintain that deliverance. You might need some aftercare.
Let me add something to that, because deliverance is also, oftentimes, we think deliverance is instantaneous.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is a marathon.
Yes.
It's a time, it's a journey.
Exactly.
And we've got to be mindful of that. All right, I'm stopped.
No. We were, maybe it's the pastor thing that we were what was coming to mind as you were talking, Dr. Carla, is that there are some times and occasions when the miracle is instantaneous in the scriptures, but there are also times, and that's what came to mind when you were talking, where, like the lepers, they were healed as they went, which is a progressive kind of treatment and ministry, and also a referral. Go show yourselves to the priest. And so I just thought all of that was important. But you raised something else, and I know we got other questions, but this right here is so. Bishop, now I know that you are certainly a bishop of the Lord's Church, and is there a way that we can speak to, and Dr. Debnam, to ministers who are just getting started? Because we live in an age of quick fixes, as Dr. Debnam just said, and we also live in an age of, quite frankly, an entertainment factor. And can both of those things kind of give a misinterpretation of what's happening in the stage moment? Because what I'm hearing you say is that you can't just measure success by how many people fell out in the moment, but by not just falling out, but by following through. That's what I hear you saying, and any of our panelists can certainly jump in here. So it looks like that because the anointing makes things look easy. And so if you're a younger person that's looking like all you did was this and everybody got delivered, what are some of the backstage things that
I want to share an illustration of that. I remember, this is probably about maybe 10 or 12 years ago. I was interviewing someone for a position here at the church, a musician, and our process is normally the musician has to go with a rehearsal with the choir just to see how they connect, how they teach their skills. And so rehearsal had ended. I called the person back to my office, and I said, well, how do you think things went? The person said to me, well, you saw they were laid out on the floor. I said, and? So the person thought that since they shouted in the rehearsal, that was a good interview. And I had to remind this person said, listen, okay, they may have shouted, but what did they learn? Did they learn the parts? Will they sing well tomorrow, or will they be so slain in spirit they're no good to us? I think that same illustration happens in ministry. So often, we think that if there is an emotional outburst, that's good fruit. Sometimes good fruit takes time to develop. For instance, you go to the supermarket and you get bananas, sometimes they're green.
Right.
They may be good later, but it takes time for them to get to the point where you really want to partake of it. We have to teach persons that ministry is not always the emotional outburst. It's not always what you see immediately during this sermonic moment. Sometimes you cannot test to see how great the fruit is until sometime later. And we have to teach. So counseling allows persons, it may take time again, as Carla said, but it's time well spent and necessary.
Are you ever listening as because you were very integral, Minister Jackson, and Cynthia, to the development of this, and you mentioned something that when you heard the call go out, you said you were listening, going like, great, and sometimes you hear Bishop preaching. So how is it when you're listening with the ear of a person who has mental health backgrounds and saying, oh boy, this is opening up some good stuff? Do you ever find yourself listening and saying, I hope people are getting this and I hope this gets follow-up?
You know, I do. I listen kind of with a third ear, and in that you recognize that the people could benefit from mental health counseling, and explaining to them that it's not a quick fix, but it is a process, and to trust the process.
Wow.
That's good. Trust the process.
Important that they understand that they can invest in themselves. That what you heard is ruminating, you're thinking about it over and over again. It's time for you to invest in you.
Wow.
It's time for you to
that's
invest in
two
you.
moments right there. Trust the process and invest in yourself. Trust the process and self-care through these through what the Renaissance Center is doing. This is now you also mentioned, Bishop, something about the stigma, and Dr. Debnam, and so would you talk a little bit about your experiences, particularly over the course of the birthing and growth of the Renaissance Center? How did you experience the stigma or the stigmata, and what did you do? What were your responses, and how did you navigate through those?
Yeah, the stigma is great, and what we experience at the Renaissance Center is a double stigma. So we have the stigma of mental health counseling, and we have the stigma of our faith. So people are leery of both. And then you combine the two, it becomes, more questionable for some persons. And so that's one kind of stigma. Then the other stigma is, of course, in our African American community or people of color as well, that we don't access these resources because the old family secret, what goes on in this house stays in the house. And just the private, I hear so many people say, well, I'm a private person. That's just code. That's a code language right there. For your clothes, you have secrets that probably are hurting you, but because you're a private person, that's just how you, work through it. So I would say those are some of the things that we still face. So it was stigma then, it's stigma now, and that is probably still our most, it's the challenge, it's the stigma. It's still big, even though we hear superstars talking about it, books coming out by everybody from athletes to musical artists about their mental health struggles. Even I have several copies of books written by ministers that have had mental health struggles. None of these people have been able to break through the stigma and so that's the tough part. So we're getting better. You hear about it more. People are more open, but that's our greatest challenge is overcoming the stigma.
Wow, Bishop, go ahead.
Because your book, Critical Collaboration, is I think is so timely because so many persons, when Carla raised the issue, is faith and counseling. Persons don't realize how critical it is that the two of them are working together.
Yes.
I mean, my faith allows me to believe that God can use people to bring me healing.
Yes.
People through His Word come alive through the voices of other persons. And what we have to learn to do in our community, and when we think about the Renaissance Center 20 years ago and dealing with that stigma, we always thought that we could deal with our problems every way, any way, but counseling. African American men, you're not supposed to go to counseling. You're supposed to tough it out. You're supposed to drink it out. You're supposed to have sex with everybody, whoever will. But that's not healthy. And so this collaboration between faith and counseling is a healthy collaboration to make sure that there's wholeness towards that in our community and in our congregations. In our congregations, every Sunday, are persons, and praise God, we're preaching to people again. But in our congregations, every Sunday, are persons who are dealing with trauma. I mean, even now, COVID-19, PTSD is real. The trauma of that, not just now, but next month, the months to come, is what we're going to have to deal. We have to deal with in our faith, of course, but also through counseling, because this COVID-19 thing has traumatized so many persons, and many of them don't even realize they're traumatized. We got some hurting persons in our pews every Sunday, virtually and in person, and who are afraid to come back to church because they're not sure who they'll be sitting near. They're not sure they're ready to be around people again. And so we got all of this that we've got to deal with again. So I guess 20 years ago, we didn't see this coming. But we've been preparing ourselves all along, not just for this, but all the other issues that are being dealt with in our community. I think our community is hurting and has been hurting for quite some time. And we've got to just make sure we're dealing with it in healthy ways.
Yes, and to me, you, Morning Star and the Renaissance Center, and you, Bishop and Dr. Debnam, really exemplify this critical collaboration. You talked about the double stigma and this, I know this word has different context in sociological dialogue, but this intersectionality, this place of both of them being important, but both of them having stigmas or stigmata that come with them. And so I want to flip the question a little bit because Dr. Debnam, you mentioned that celebrities and other persons in different fields, athletes in different genres of our culture are now making that moment. And that's important, very important, because of the influence that they have on their fan base. But I want to ask you, while we're talking about collaboration, sometimes we're looking at, and I asked our panelists over here, Minister Jackson and Sister Cynthia, are you ever listening to a moment and saying there's some rich mental health issues? I want to flip it in the name of collaboration, because for a world that does not know Christ, that is becoming increasingly secular, the theologically neutral language of the mental health disciplines can always get more press, if you will, more time on the radio, more time in television. Actually, if you look at a television show now, when a problem comes up, they'll say, I need to talk to a therapist. That's a really different moment from when Hollywood used to have somebody going in a confessional with their priest. Or I got to talk to when was the last time you saw a family on TV say, I got a problem, I really need to talk to the pastor? You know what I mean? So the theologically neutral language of counseling will always allow it a larger exposure in a more politically correct genre. So if we are looking at sometimes some moments in church and saying, these are some mental health crises, are we ever listening to mental health dialogue and persons from our celebrity community and all of that and saying, yeah, we need that, but this is also a spiritual crisis. And at the end of the day, it's not either or. You know, do you ever find yourself looking at some things and saying, you need to do that, but you also need to get back in a faith community?
I would say yes. I mean, of course, we show and express what we're going through in different ways. And so sometimes, if we have, in the words of Henry Blackaby, a crisis of belief, right, then that could take us either way. It could take us in a spiritual journey where we're uncovering the meaning of life, what is God saying, what is God doing, or it can take us sometimes into a mental health crisis where we may shut down, have some other responses to what we're going through. So I think it's not either or, it's and both. Both of these things need to be tended to in different ways and can be tended to together. And part of the pastoral counseling paradigm is that you bring God into the room. When you enter in the room, you, the therapist, so even if you never say God or the name of God or Jesus, he's there. God is there. So that's a part of it. And using your presence, and we talk about this in church, the ministry of presence. That is a critical ministry. That's part of the number one thing we do as therapists is have the ministry of presence. Because if you don't have that ministry of presence, meaning you don't connect with the person in the room, no work can be done. That's the most critical piece of the therapeutic process, is the ministry of presence.
Understood, yeah. And that just comes to mind as we're talking in terms of intersectionality of faith and mental health, and both having stigmas, and the word we're using, collaboration, which literally means co-laborers, or working together. You know, there's this verse in Corinthians, I believe, where Paul is talking to the church at Corinth and saying, you're getting into this moment where some of you are saying, I'm with Cephas, and others of you are saying with I'm Apollos, and others of you are saying I'm with Paul, you know, and he finally, his conclusion is, but all things are yours. God has created all of these different ministries. Some scholars say that Apollos had a different, of course, technique and approach than Paul did. And so people are drawn to personalities and preferences. But what I hear you saying and emulating is that it's not either or, it's and both. Am I capturing that?
Yeah, that's my concept of it. That, I mean, it's not one or the other. We have to be able to minister in both ways. And if persons come in and they're not aware of God or a spiritual life, then we still bring it in the room with our presence. And so that's going to be there, whether we talk about that directly or not.
Sure.
And so that's why it's and both, because, you know, apart from me, you can do nothing. That's you know.
And I agree with what everyone had said. You have to meet the person where they are.
Yes.
And from that point, then you develop a dialogue and be able to move them from one point to another.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Certainly.
I think another illustration of it is the season that we're coming out of, this pandemic. This pandemic has put a strain on persons' mental health, emotional health, and caused them a lot of anxiety, frustration, concern. But I also believe it's a call to get back to God. One of the things that our community has done as they become more prosperous and more comfortable in their success is drift away from God. What this season has done, however, is called us to take a look at two areas of mental health, but also our relationship with God. Because we have folk praying who ain't prayed in years. But also, Bishop, we've had persons tuning into our worship experiences virtually who had left the church, stopped praying.
Yes, yeah.
But when this pandemic hit them, they started tuning in again. Why? Because God got our attention. He allowed the moment to get our attention. And so, again, mental health is at the forefront, but also our spiritual lives. And so the season that we're trying to transition out of Bible says all things work together for the good of them. Somehow it's worked to get persons back to God. Initially it was persons' emotions that was getting the best of them. But then they realized, they started thinking, I need God too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what I was just in the name of collaboration. There's a psychologist and psychiatrist, rather, Archie Smith, who in a scholarly article, and he's a Christian psychiatrist, but he made the argument that sometimes in our minds, because we have in a large society division of labor, and we get into competition and one or the other. And so I'm just trying to say I just thought it was in the name of balance that both are important. There's a scripture, and I don't want to mess with it too much, but that's how theology and mental health can work together. But there's a scripture of a rich young ruler, a millennial of his day, who said, what do I have to do to get to the next level, if you will? And when Jesus gives him the prescription, he says, that's where I get off. I can't do that. And he went away, and he went away sad. Well, if you got what you wanted and you walked away, why are you sad? Well, and so, because some part of you knows that there's this connection and this relationship on a spiritual level that still is so very important. And so I'm trying to, I hope you feel where I'm going, like in the name of collaboration, that it's not either or, it's and both. It's not just simply, you can reframe this as it's not just simply, well, I'll get me a good therapist and go to brunch on Sunday morning, and I'm good. but it's okay. Got me a good therapist, got me a great pastor, and I'm moving forward. Got me a church community, and I'm being healed as I go. And it's not either or. And so that's what collaboration means to me when I'm hearing this dialogue and what I see you modeling as well. So I want to ask a question, if I may, if there's certainly. My next question, because you raised it a little bit, Bishop and Dr. Debnam, you talked about the coronavirus pandemic, and that certainly being the traumatic event, if you will. And by definition, post-trauma is after the experience or after the event. And so I want to talk about, if you will, the next 20 years of the Renaissance Center. Where do we go from here, particularly in a post-traumatized culture? What would ministry look like, and what will the next 20 years of this collaboration perhaps look like?
That's a good one. That's a good question. I foresee us, when the pandemic began last year and we had to do teletherapy and began doing the RC chats just to get the mental health message out into the community. I foresee us doing more of that. I see it's going to be hybrid, no more just in person or just therapy, but there will be alternative therapies, which are already in play, whether it's play therapy, music therapy, bibliotherapy, other ways of helping people to get the healing they need, because people learn differently, people heal differently. It's different processes and parts of their brains that accept, the treatment, modalities that are presented, as well as the spiritual portion of that healing. So I see more of that. I see just still continuing to fight stigma, and we're going to have some long-term effects. Cynthia and I were talking about this right before we got started, so and she'll probably have a different take on this, but I feel like we're hitting the tip of the iceberg. That's all I'm at. So for us, for the next 20 years, is going to be dealing with these last couple, years, because it'll be a couple years by the time we get out of the pandemic officially. So
Wow.
Yeah, I totally agree because although the signs are saying that the pandemic may be coming to an end, maybe, although they're projecting surges because of unvaccinated persons and this variant, what we'll be dealing with in ministry is the residue. For instance, we have persons in our pews who 5 years from now will still be grieving losses that they experienced during 2020, 21, maybe in 2022, that they have not come to grips with. Young persons who never had a long relationship with a parent because they lost them to COVID-19. And so we'll be dealing with this residue for quite some time. And it's going to be, it has to be dealt with in a counseling office, but also from our pulpits, from our lecterns, because what we have to be sensitive to over these next 5, 10, even 15 years is what the scars that persons will still have in the years to come. The book Wounded Healer, we ourselves as leaders have been wounded in this season. I mean, we went in this season, God, knowing how in the world are we going to get through this thing?
Yeah.
And the added responsibilities, the added weight on our shoulders, the added weight on the shoulders of members has worn persons down. And so we're going to have to teach self-care of the next 20 years or so. We're going to have to teach. You got to take care of yourself. And part of that self-care is just like you go to your doctor for your yearly checkups. You're going to encourage persons, hey, go get a checkup to see how someone else is sensing how you're doing. Because just because the pandemic ends supposedly now in the next few months, that residue is deeply embedded in persons. And we know because it's affected all of us.
Yes. Wow, this is good. Question. Is the pandemic because this may affect treatment strategies in terms of where we go from here. So it's just a question that's coming to mind. Should we think of the pandemic as we prepare to minister post-event, if you will, whenever that is? I know in some ways we're still in it, so our assessments are tempered by the fact that we're still in the moment. But as it currently stands, do you think that in terms of being places of ministry and treatment for traumatic experience, is the coronavirus pandemic to be perceived or regarded as a transformative moment? Meaning, because trauma is usually transformative. 9/11 was a trauma moment. It changed the way we travel, that we still, it's a permanent almost change. That's a transformative moment from trauma. So is the crisis a traumatic moment of transformation, or do we view the pandemic as an interruption? The difference is, this is just my thoughts, an interruption, like when your power goes out at your house. When power is interrupted, when the power is restored, you just really go right back to everything as it was. TV's still up, radio's still on. That's because your power was interrupted. But on the other side of it, you go right back to business as usual. Is this an interruption or is this a transformation?
I want to go out on a limb and say it's a transformation. Here's why, for instance, there are some new norms, new patterns, new habits that we've established that many persons may not break away from. For instance, it's something as simple as the way you greet somebody when you meet them or talk with them. How long will we hesitate in shaking somebody's hand, embracing someone that we do not know, or how long will it be before persons stop wearing masks? I know some person said, I may wear a mask forever. Why? Because what has it done? It not only has protected her from COVID-19, protected her from other colds, viruses, flus. And so they see it as, hey, this has worked better than what I thought it would work. I didn't want to do it initially. And so I think it's transformed so many patterns that we used to have. How many of us now, I flew for the first time maybe 2 or 3 months ago, I don't know. And on my first flight back, listen, I had on 2 masks and a face shield. and I've been flying on a regular basis since then now, but I'm still, I'm very cautious about who sits next to me. You know how we do on planes, we fly Southwest, we go spread out and put our head down, somebody sit next to us. But if they do, I'm turning away from them. And so it's created some new patterns for us. Yeah. And I think some things we're not going back to.
Wow. Yeah. I'm having a moment because I joke with Lady Robinson. She has one of those too, and she wears that. And so when she comes to church sometimes, you done added to Ephesians 6. You got on the whole armor of God. You got the sword of the Spirit. You got the breastplate of righteousness. You got the shield of faith.
Yeah.
And the shield of face.
Yeah.
So you've added to the word of God. But what you're saying is it's been transformed.
Yeah.
And any of our panel, it begs the question: what are some of the psychological aspects of having become conditioned, if you want to use a little behaviorist, conditioned to seeing others as bringers of this possible disease instead of bringers of light and fellowship? And how do you gradually desensitize after having raised this elevated sense of concern? What are some of the aspects of that we may have to be mindful of?
I just want to go back to what Bishop was saying in reference to norm and new norm.
Yeah.
Okay, so for our people who are germaphobes,
Yeah.
okay, so I've heard people say, we're going to continue to wear the mask and we're going to continue to wash our clothes when we come back from outside. I'm like, are you serious? And he's like, yeah, because, this is a new norm. We don't know what's on our clothes now. People take off their shoes when they come in the house, but now they're taking off their shoes and their clothes.
Well, it also reminds me of the, what you call it, when you sneeze a lot and you have, a pollen going around. And so people seems to take a second look at you just because you're sneezing now.
Coughing.
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
I think it's transformative too, because the changes that are taking place are probably going to be permanent. Like you said, it's not going to be temporary, like interruption. And that's the scary part, because some of what we're seeing in developmental stages, we're talking about that, and Cynthia can talk a little bit more about that, and our children, from pre-K, well, infants on up, we're going to have some developmental delays, social emotional delays. We already know of the students that missed proms, that missed graduations last year. So now we're having sports events for 2020 and 2021. A lot. It's confusing. Oh, this was the 2020 Euro
Olympics,
Cup,
the 2020,
the 2020 Olympics. It's the 2020. So it's like 2020 didn't happen. That's what we would like to believe, and we're starting over again. And we know, like, an interruption, but we know it's not an interruption. It's not 2020.
Yeah.
We can call it 2020 all we want, and we're doing that. So, but yes, Cynthia, can you talk about the
Yes.
developmental?
So for the children returning to school, it's going to be different for them, especially those that's in pre-K through, 8th grade. They're so young, and the first thing they want to do is just come up and hug you. And you can't do that any longer. And the fact that they, like to share things, you can't share. And so it's going to be a problem in that we have to address the social, emotional learning aspect of, in addition to the educational loss for a whole year, whole academic year lost. So it's a lot to deal with.
Yes. Bishop, now these challenges are and that's why I wanted to raise that, because we're talking about where do we go from here. Having had this transformative moment, I think, is the consensus, that this is not just an interruption, and sometimes we may try to cleave to that and just pick up right up, but there's some things that we have to analyze and be prepared to minister to, both as mental health and faith professionals, because these are challenges, but they're also opportunities. So what are some of the opportunities that we should maximize, or are there any particular ways, not just that, but Bishop, in our last couple of minutes, I know you also are passionate about social action and community engagement, and you talked a lot about using the phrase "our community." And so one of the things we learned from the pandemic was that it really exposed some already pre-existing conditions, which is trauma on top of trauma. And so in what ways particularly are these opportunities for us to meet some needs in our community?
One of the things that the pandemic forced us to, and was that church, community, counseling center, we all had to make sure that we had our hand in community. One of the challenges, I don't want to say failures, or misses, I'll use the word misses, of the church over the last 15 Church Universal years or so has been our connection with community. What this has done, and the Renaissance Center helped us with this, is that we had to make sure that we were addressing relevant concerns, basic needs of community. So one of the things we did, Renaissance Center did, has done throughout the pandemic rather, was that we received some grants to offer free counseling to community persons because of the trauma that they were experiencing and going through. So we as church, we're doing more than just giving away food, but we're also providing therapy for persons who were feeling the weight of the season. What we have to do when we look at where we go from here, Renaissance Center in particular, is making sure again that we do not leave the people behind when we think the storm has passed by. The storm, by definition, may be over, but again, as I mentioned earlier, the residue remains. And so what the Renaissance Center will have to continue doing over the next 20 years is making sure that we are providing services to community that address relevant needs. And one of those most relevant needs is mental and emotional health.
Wow. Which was already a concern.
Already a concern.
Pre-pandemic.
Right.
But has now been exacerbated
Yep.
in the context of.
And now persons are more, I'm going to use this word loosely, they're more ready to receive the services. Before prior to January 2020, many persons were saying, I ain't doing that. But that answer has been slowly fading away for some persons at least, and now they're more ready to receive counseling services. And so what we have to do is make sure that we don't leave the persons when we think the storm is over, because the residue remains.
Wow. Dr. Debnam, do you see that? Like, how does it feel to see the rise in not just opportunity, but potential and interest over these? God has kept the Renaissance Center and grown you 20 years. How does that feel and a sustainable future? How does that feel?
Yeah, I think it's a blessing. You know, we planted the seed with the Renaissance Center. You know, we thank God for the seed of the Renaissance Center that has, you know, been a place of training, of healing. We've just been a consistent presence. And with that consistency, that will give people hope, knowing that there is a place to turn. Sometimes I'll ask the clients, well, who's in your support system? Who's your circle? And sometimes just knowing you have a circle, or I'll think sometimes all it takes is knowing someone cares, is enough to start the healing process going. I mean, when the person came up to Jesus and said, if you can you heal? If you can heal me, will you heal me? If I can, I can. You know, I got this. But in his doubt, he had faith enough to ask for the healing. And I think we're at that intersection of faith and mental health, and the doubt is being quelled by all of everything that's going on in our world. And we're hoping that we'll still be able to meet the needs of the community. We see ourselves still meeting those needs, and just are hopeful that people will continue to be receptive to getting healed, and that's our ultimate goal.
Bishop, I know that we have persons watching. You never know who may be watching. So when we're talking about this point, crises also being opportunities for intervention. And there may be someone watching who is like, oh, okay, so how do they contact the Renaissance Center or Dr. Debnam?
They can contact us by phone, 410-409-0025. They can go to our website, www.therenaissancecenter.org. So those are ways they can contact us. And, you know, we appreciate any questions you may have and concerns that you bring to us. And know that as we're growing and in this pandemic season, that we're all growing and being transformed in so many ways. And that's what the idea is, that we can continue to grow. Even if we have a crisis, even if we are struggling, that doesn't mean that the growth has to stop. And that's what we want people to know. You can grow through this, even though you're going through a difficult season, you can grow through it.
Wow. Now, I know we're in our last minute or so, but Bishop, as a visionary, how does it feel to see 20 years later going from a ministerial aspect, from risk to reward?
It's amazing. We started Renaissance Center. This is the story we did not tell, in a little row home on Winners Lane that we renovated. It was probably all of 300 square feet, maybe 300 square feet. I remember it was 2 stories. To get down the steps, you had to duck your head to get down the steps in that little home. But it worked for the first few years of Renaissance Center. Moved from there down to 300 Winners Lane, which is a large 3,000 square foot building. Now Renaissance Center is in a 40,000 square foot building on Security Boulevard, and because of the need, the risk, the faith step, and make sure we were addressing necessary needs and situations in the community. So center has blossomed. It's amazing. When we opened, we did not know how well it would be received, and it took some time for a person to receive it. A person was asking, why is a church doing this? And now we're first begin to see 5, 10 years later, this is why, because we need to bring healing to our community.
Well, I'm so glad you did it. You know, because I've said this privately, and even when you're not around, that this person right here in this seat was watching and didn't know that God was using you to inspire. So in many ways, and you mentioned the Critical Collaboration book, and the Renaissance Center is in it, and one of my tributes, because what God did in you was so inspirational. And so on this 20th anniversary celebration, I celebrate what you're doing. I celebrate the model that you are exemplifying for culture and kingdom, to the glory of God. So I know we're about out of time. Listen, I'm the host, but this their house. Yeah. And so,
there's a special presentation that's been made.
Wonderful.
I thought you were doing it. For 20 years of service, we want to let you know we appreciate all that you've done to build, make vision become reality, and empower God's people.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone. And I would love to thank Cynthia and Vanilla, our beginning visionaries. Vanilla named the Renaissance Center what it is and picked the foundational scripture, Romans 12:2, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Cynthia, with her clinical expertise, guided us, led us, and just made sure we were excellent. And we've taken hold of the foundation that both of these ladies have laid for us and continue to build on it. So we thank God for them, especially taking time out of their schedule to be here this evening. So you have any more remarks?
I'm thanking everybody.
Oh. Anna, thank you. Sorry.
We have the Morning Star for supporting a vision that was unique in church culture. When we introduced it to leadership, membership, they supported it. Sometimes, our leaders support without totally understanding. They support it, and now look at this. 20 years later, I still have not seen all the great things God has in store for the Renaissance Center.
Well, thank you, everyone, for watching. Thank you for being a part. And thank you, Morning Star family, and thank you, friends of Morning Star. And thank you for being a part of this stellar celebration.